Fuller writes a letter to a trusted friend of his, containing sensitive information that could kill him if discovered. After finishing his letter with a good luck, he pays the woman lying in the bed next to him, then goes to the restaurant of the hotel, where he's proposed his usual table, but he declines politely while lighting a cigarette. He rather goes to the bartender and gives him the letter, asking him to forward it to a certain Douglas Hall. After Fuller leaves the building and enters a cab, who takes him home, we see the bartender open the letter and read its content. Fuller enters his home, where he's greeted by his cat and scolded by his wife about smoking. And just as he's about to sleep, he wakes up from a simulation, leaving Fuller in a panic state where the environment is way more modern than where he was. He quickly regains control of his thought and silently leaves the room he was in and goes to a bar, in which he leaves a tone message to Douglas, stating he discovered something that will change everything, before recognizing someone outside. He steps out to greet him, but he is met with a knife before being stabbed by the individual. Douglas wakes up from sleep. He goes to the bathroom to prepare himself, but he finds blood on the sink and a blood-stained shirt. He quickly leaves the apartment and goes to the mortuary, where he meets a couple of inspectors asking him to identify a body, Fuller's body. An officer questions Douglas about his relationship with the old man. He tells him he worked for him for 6 years. The officer is still suspicious about Mr. Hall. He proposes him to go to his office, but Douglas refuses, and rather goes to Fuller's apartment accompanied by the officer, who questions him about his job. Douglas refuses to tell the officer more, as it is confidential information. They meet in the other room a woman named Jane Fuller, the daughter of the deceased. Douglas is surprised. He didn't know that his boss had a daughter. He then goes to the 13th floor, which turns out to be the simulation room. He meets there an engineer who informs Douglas that Fuller connected himself to the simulation, and he was surprised too hearing that Fuller had a daughter. Douglas became even more suspicious about Jane, and he follows her taxi. Detective McBain also goes to the 13th floor, where the engineer named Whitney explains to him what the simulation, a recreation of Los Angeles in 1937, with created humans named Unities. Douglas talks to Jane, where she tells him that her father called her to liquidate the company, and after Douglas leaves, she proceeds to her suite where she meets a lawyer who tells her that the company will soon be hers, but the current president will be Douglas Hall. The police believes Douglas murdered Fuller, and to learn more about the murder, Douglas goes inside the simulation with the help of Whitney. Douglas is now in the simulation, in absolute awe at the realism of it. He takes a break from his simulation job to go meet in simulation Hannon Fuller, which doesn't seem to know who he really is in the simulation. He's not the genius scientist, just a librarian, still looking for who the letter might have been left for. He goes to meet every Unity Fuller interacted with, starting with Bridget Manila. He goes to the hotel where she is, and it turns out to be the hotel Fuller used to stay at. She directs him at the bartender, Ashton, the same bartender who Fuller gave the letter to. It surprised Douglas when meeting him, as he is Whitney's avatar in simulation, and when asked about the letter, he says he knows nothing about it. Douglas starts feeling sick. He rushes to the bathroom, and we see his physical body also is suffering. His time in the simulation is over. The Unity takes back the control of the body in the simulation, and Douglas wakes up from it, feeling exhausted, and without even a rest. A security guard breaks in telling him that a friend of Fuller wants to talk to him. Douglas goes to meet with the man, which is the bartender of the bar Douglas died at. He asks for a more private place to talk, and Douglas accepts. He says Douglas must pay, and tries to blackmail him. He believes Douglas killed the old man. After a fight, the bartender flees and says he'll go to the police. Douglas calls Jane, inviting her to dinner. They start by talking about Hannon, and they both believe they had already met each other. Jane proposed to dance, and even though Douglas was reticent at first, he accepts. The police rush to Douglas's apartment, where they find him sleeping alone. Detective McBain takes him for questioning and informs him that his car was in the murder scene, and that the bartender who became a witness was murdered, furthermore incriminating Douglas. They incarcerated him until Jane went to the police center and said that Douglas was with her during the murder. After a conversation with Jane, Douglas goes back to the simulation, but he forgets to set a timer to come out. He goes to in-simulation Hannon Fuller and explains to him why he blacks out. They go have a drink at the hotel where Hannon spent his time, and when they arrive, everyone recognizes Mr. Fuller, despite him not having a single memory of it. Douglas asks him to remember whatever he can, and he points to a girl named Erica. Then he remembers Bridget, and finally, he remembers he gave a letter to Ashford, the bartender. Douglas rushes to catch him, but the crowded place allows Ashford to flee, and while trying to catch him, he gets trapped. Ashford tells his story. He followed the letter's instructions which said, "Go to the end of the world." So Ashford drove as far as he could, but he never reached a place. He blames Douglas for this, and wanting revenge, Ashford shoots at him twice with a gun. Yet, Douglas flees from his assailant for a time, but the bloodstains revealed his position. Douglas and Ashford fought vigorously, and as Ashford was about to drown Douglas, he gets pulled out of the simulation by Whitney. Understanding that this whole simulation thing was unethical, Douglas decides to shut it down, despite Whitney's opposition. He goes to meet with Jane, but find that she left her hotel. He instead finds Detective McBain there, who informs Douglas that Hannah never had a daughter. Douglas then bribes her driver to know where she went. He quickly gets to the location and discovers that she is not Jane Fuller anymore, but Natasha Molinaro, a regular cashier at a supermarket. She doesn't recognize him, even though she seems like she vaguely knows him. As he was about to get to his car, Natasha rushes to him to give him his credit card, which he forgot at the supermarket, and confirms she have a déjà vu experience. Douglas gets into his car and drives as far as he can, just like Ashford, until he reached the end of his simulation. Detective McBain also goes to meet Natasha, and he sees the obvious conclusion. It's not Jane Fuller, even though they have the same body. His fellow police officers inform him she also suffered from amnesia the past few days, and as they are talking, someone connects to Natasha's body, resulting in a drastic change of her behavior. She calls Douglas to tell him she can explain everything and tells him to meet her at Fuller's apartment. She explains to him there are thousands of simulations like this one, but his simulation is the only one that was able to create a simulation. And when Fuller found the truth about the simulation, he tried to stop the project. Douglas asks her who killed Fuller, and as he uttered those words, he remembers that he killed Fuller. Jane tells him that the one who took control of Douglas's body is her husband, and that he spent too much time in the simulation, using it as his playground. He became abusive with her, and she tells him she is in the simulation to meet her husband again, because Douglas is the same person as her husband. At the same time, Whitney decides to enter the simulation as his avatar, Ashford. He gets killed during the simulation, and as he wakes up, he seems clueless about what's happening. The security guard calls Douglas on the phone to inform him, and Douglas gets dressed to go. And as he leaves, Jane takes the phone to call Detective McBain. When Douglas arrives, he finds out that the guard got killed, and that it's Ashton and Whitney's body. He explains to him that this world too is a simulation. Ashton wants proof of that, so Douglas takes him to the 13th floor, and on the elevator, Jane's real husband connects on Douglas, and he kills Ashton. After that, he goes back to his wife, Jane, and she calls him David, his actual name. He confronts her about her infidelity, and she responds that he changed. David tries to kill Jane, but she manages to escape his grip, but she eventually gets caught. Right as he's about to shoot her, he gets shot through a window by Detective McBain. David dies in the simulation, leaving his place to Douglas in the real world. In June 2024, Jane wakes up from the simulation too, and shows Douglas her world, which is futuristic to Douglas, and it ends with an electronic turning off in the end.